The Nephilim across the board has always been understood to mean the name of the offspring of the unholy union between these sons of God and human women. I never understood this as a reality right from the start based on the simple reading from the sentence structure of the text. When I understood what the common understanding was, I figured I was in error and, embarrassed by my confusion, just put the thought away, but it kept pulling at me. Recently, there has been a controversy over the issue of giants, a second incursion after the flood, and how they reappear. In my studies, I also accumulated many myths and legends of giants throughout history which seem to tie into the Genesis 6 Nephilim giants, with the myths of the hollow earth directly linked to giants and Theosophy's description of a genetic strain of surface dwellers and of a mixed race and a pure one living inside the earth. All of this seemed to come together. I then decided, after considering all of the evidence, that in fact I was onto something and I was not in error. I remained silent about this understanding about the Nephilim because at the time it was not that important and would maybe only add to the confusion of Genesis 6 with the Sephite lie. The most important idea was that a separate group or not, they were still evil and part of Satan's gang of bad guys, so it didn't matter too much. Recently, however, though, a few of us who understand the Genesis 6 paradigm have debated and some even arguing about a second incursion after the flood, some even denying that there are or were any further repeats of Genesis 6 today. Others say the reappearance was the result of tainted Nephilim blood in one of the daughters married to one of Noah's sons. Personally, there is no way I see this in Scripture, direct or any allusion to this idea. It creates more problems and direct conflict to Scripture than it does to explain anything. Some have tried to claim that the Scripture claims that also after that means whenever, so that whenever this interbreeding happened, only giants resulted. The Hebrew in Genesis 6, however, could make this an accurate understanding. It could be correct by words and mechanics, but in true hermeneutics, that thought is not carried out and denies the end-time return as normal-looking beings who are able to mix into human society without detection. This concept also is not consistent to the universal myths and actual archaeological findings either. So with all of this infighting and debate, maybe it is now time to stand out from the others and share what I believe the Lord showed me right from the start about Nephilim and the Gibor. First, my disclaimer and preventive maintenance for future headaches and heartaches is that what I'm about to present is something to consider. It is not intended to be doctrine or any conclusive "thus saith the Lord." While I believe it to be inspired, this is relative and not conclusive. So for my many colleagues and religious henhunters out there that are ready to jump on anything different or new, I say relax. I am not giving you any pretense to call me names like heretic or false teacher. Many of you have already done that, and while at the same time borrowing what you do like and claiming it as your own material. If I had a PhD, I would be quoted, but as a welder from Detroit, I'm not given credit for anything good, just knocked for what you dislike or disagree with. Lord, save me from your followers. I know a carpenter and a bunch of fishermen who had the same problem, so not to compare myself to them, but maybe I am in good company facing the same challenges they once faced. So with all of that disclaimer, let's dig into the text of Genesis 6. Look at the text in Genesis 6. We are first told that the sons of God saw the daughters of mankind and took them as wives, all that they chose. Then there is the addition that in this same time and after that time there were giants upon the earth. My question to pose to you is based on the sentence structure and context. Are the giants the name of the offspring, or are they a separate group of entities that are simply there when this mixing happened and are said to return after judgment and the destruction of the flood? The sentence structure can, in proper use, go either way until you replace the giants as the offspring. In doing this, the sentence structure may make my point. So let's read this as if the Nephilim is the name of the offspring. There were offspring in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men and bore children. Well, it almost seems silly that they would be mentioned in this way because, of course, if they are the offspring and the result of this union, they had to be there then. I believe the only thing that makes sense is that this is a separate group that is simply there when this unholy union happens. The proof in this can be in the rest of the next statement, further defining the specific activity and the result, and the description of the Gibor. Let me paraphrase it using the possible sentence structure and possible intent of the writer. The sons of God saw and took wives of mankind and produced children. And when this happened, there were giants in the earth then who came back afterward, when the sons of God came into having sex with females, and they bore children to them. The same, meaning the offspring of this union, the children, not the Nephilim. Then we get the detailed information about the offspring as the mighty men which were of old, men of renown. They were, number one, men who were of old, meaning, based on the words 5769, they were mortal men that were made eternal. They were mighty men, the Gibor, Strong's number 1368. They were valiant or tyrannical warriors. Number three, the renown, which is from Strong's number 8034, and we're told from the root of 7760, and we're told to compare that with 8064. Now, when you do that process, you get a combination of the idea that these renown were famous warriors disguised or taking on the role of a heavenly authority, as in being worshipped as gods. Number four, what we know from history and archaeological findings are the fact that all cultures and races on all continents and islands worshipped a pantheon of gods and goddesses said to come from the heavens and their offspring, or hybrid half-humans, half-gods. When we see other scripture as to what the Bible says are worshipped in 2 Chronicles 33:3, we get the description of humans who were worshiping the host of heaven. This would be heavenly residents that came from above and their hybrid offspring, exactly what history and archaeology confirms. Now, in all of the combined legends and myths, not all the gods or offspring were giants. Some were, but most were not, with most of the offspring being ones who intermingled with the human society, unknown for who they were because they looked just like regular human beings. If the Nephilim were also the Gibor, would not all of the myths and legends be consistent with all offspring being giants? The Gibor are the ones being worshipped as gods, and if the Nephilim are the Gibor, they would all have to be giants, a detail I do not think the myths and legends would forget to mention. So who are the giants? If the Nephilim are the Gibor, it does leave this question on the myths and legends unanswered. If the Nephilim are something or someone else, the Bible does not come right out and simply say who they are. Both groups, the Nephilim and the Gibor, were worshipped as gods, but they may have two different variations as the seed of the serpent. Another problem that adds to the confusion is the fact that the word Gibor can also mean human warriors that are idolized by their valorous actions and fame. Dr. Mike Heiser explores this idea of two different classes of rebels in the wording of the giants that appear after the flood in Numbers 33:3.
To be honest with you, I favor this view, but Numbers 13 might be a problem with it, and this is something I still need to think through. Very plainly says, we saw the Nephilim. Now watch this. Here's one spelling, right here, with that little letter, and here's the other one. We saw the Nephilim, ha-Nephilim there. The Anakites are from the Nephilim. This phrase, from the Nephilim, is min ha-Nephilim. You'll notice there's no yod here. You have the same word spelled two different ways. I think the reason why this is done here is because this is the way it's spelled in Genesis 6. The writer wants to link these Nephilim after the flood with the ones before the flood. And if that's the case, if the Anakim came from, in other words, were related to the Nephilim from before the flood, you don't need continuing activity. You don't need the continual cohabitation. You have a genetic relationship intact, so to speak. The whole rest of the Old Testament. Abraham runs into giants. He runs into the Rephaim, the Zuzim, the Amim, the Horites. You'll find out later in verses, these are all giant clans. What's really interesting about this list, some of the terms, when God makes a covenant with Abraham, again, this is God's portion. He makes a covenant in Genesis 15, and he says, I'm going to give you, Israel, the descendants of Abraham, the Israelites, I'm going to give you the land that's now currently owned by these people, Kenites, Kenizzites, Cadmonites, all the ites of the Old Testament. And then there's this phrase, this word, Rephaim. What's really odd about this, you'll notice, again, you don't have to read Hebrew, but watch this. You see this little letter here, and this one, the ones in yellow? You notice how all the words end with that little yod? It's called in grammar the gentilic ending. These are people group names. This one does not end with that. People groups, God says, you're going to, in the future, disinherit certain people groups in the land. However, there's going to be one group that doesn't live in just one place. these guys. Rephaim refers to essentially a population not localized in one area. These are your enemies as well. Rephaim were the giants.
There might be some compelling evidence alluding to a connection with another group that is mentioned as part of the Satanic Rebel Alliance. For this idea to be understood, unfortunately, it includes elements that are just way too out of the box for most traditional churchgoers and traditionalists in the so-called scientific community to even begin to believe. Satan has hid many truths that are described in the Bible as laughable, silly ideas on par with a flat earth or the moon made of green cheese. The first hard concept to come across is the fact that somehow the earth is hollow. It somehow exists as a two-chambered pocket separated by a huge chasm with openings at the poles now covered by ice. Why this concept becomes so important is because this inner realm was given as a dwelling place to a certain group of people as a judgment from God, but also to protect and preserve them for a future purpose. They and their descendants, after this judgment was imposed, were excluded from salvation and separated from surface dwellers, given an impediment of some kind and yet made powerful by God. First, we have to see these missing elements. I will briefly show these claims from the scriptures and themselves, taken from my series on the hollow earth. The first place we will look at in the Bible is Luke 16:19 through 26. While speaking to his disciples about stewardship, faith, and forgiveness, Jesus told an actual literal story of Lazarus and the rich man. He does not name the rich man, but he names the beggar Lazarus. Whenever Jesus spoke a parable, he never used personal names or specific geographical locations. The proper rule of interpretation is whenever names are used for persons or geographical locations, this text is to be taken as a narrative of an actual historical and literal event. Among evangelists, this text and quote by Jesus is taken as a literal historical narration of a real event. Understanding this, the descriptions of the geography must also be literal and true. Luke 16:19-26. There was a certain rich man, which was clothed in fine linen, and fared sumptuously every day. And there was a certain beggar named Lazarus, which was laid at the gate, full of sores, and desiring to be fed with crumbs which fell from the rich man's table. Moreover, the dogs came and licked his sores. And it came to pass that he died, and was carried by the angels into Abraham's bosom. The rich man also died, and was buried. And in hell he lifted up his eyes, being in torments, and saw Abraham far off, and Lazarus in his bosom. And he cried and said, Father Abraham, have mercy on me, and send Lazarus, that he may dip the tip of his finger in water, and cool my tongue, for I am tormented in this flame. But Abraham said, Son, remember that you in your lifetime received your good things, and likewise Lazarus evil things. But now he is comforted, and you are tormented. And besides all this, between us and you, there is a great gulf fixed, so that they which would pass from here to you cannot, neither can they pass to us that would come from here. Now let's look at the geographical details described in this text and disregard the spiritual implications for now. We have two areas or chambers separated by a gulf or a chasm, which is fixed. When we hear of Abraham's bosom, we usually think of the upper front body part area between the arms. Some say this is an allegorical reference for a fondness. The proper meaning here has been lost by a cultural expression common 2,000 years ago but foreign in today's world. Any Bible dictionary will reveal to you that bosom refers to the bosom of a garment. That is the hollow formed by the upper forepart of a tunic. This is a rather loose garment bound by a girdle or sash around the waist used for keeping and carrying things, the upper fold or the pocket. This literal event told by Jesus describes a two-part pocket that is eternal or subterranean. One area is negative and one positive, but separated between each other by a gulf. This was the Old Testament concept of hell or Sheol as being a place where all departed souls went into one or the other place. But notice from the text, even though departed spirits lived there, it was also a very physical place inside the earth. The Bible contains additional scripture to support this idea of a two-chambered hollow earth. Psalms 116:3 states, The sorrows of death compass me, and the pains of hell got a hold upon me. I found trouble and sorrow. The word pains in Hebrew is metzar, meaning something tight. It comes from the Hebrew word kabah, meaning a paunch, as in the cavity or the first stomach of a cud-chewing animal. They have more than one stomach. So you can see that in the etymology of the word for pain, we get an understanding of a two-chambered hollow earth. In addition, words such as sea, abyss, pit, and the deep interchangeably mean the same place within the earth. When the flood waters came, the fountains of the deep burst forth to the surface, as described in Genesis 6. Where did they burst? Subterranean. H.M. Howell, a Christian educator, wrote in his book Cosmic Problems Solved in 1895, he believed that a parallel existed between the ocean currents and the four rivers mentioned in Genesis 2:10 through 14, as flowing out of Eden. Eden then would be on the concave side of the globe, with the waters welling out through the hole at the South Pole, completing its course back into the earth at the opening in the North Pole. Current theories of the location of Eden do not match up with the modern geography, and even known changes from the ancient conditions give no conclusive results. Some have even tried to say Eden is in another dimensional plane on the same earth, and that is why we cannot find it. But a further search in the scriptures can provide a better logical answer. The death and resurrection of Jesus created the bridge back and the way for all who believe in him. Ephesians 4:9 says, "Now this he ascended." What does it mean but that he also first descended into the lower parts of the earth? Two different results from two different areas were accomplished by Jesus in this inner realm. Matthew 27:52 and 53 said, "And the graves were opened, and many bodies of the saints which slept arose, and came out of the graves after his resurrection, and went into the holy city, and appeared unto many." After this resurrection, the upper half of Sheol was left empty. Now, upon death of those born by the Spirit, they go directly to be with the Lord in the heavenly dimension, as mentioned in 2 Corinthians 5:18 or 5:8. In the lower chamber, Jesus declared something to the fallen angels and their offspring from the Genesis 6 event. 1 Peter 3:18 through 20 states, "And being put to death in the flesh," meaning Jesus, "but made alive by the Spirit, by whom he also went and preached to the spirits in prison, who formerly were disobedient, when once the divine long-suffering waited in the days of Noah while the ark was being prepared." Preached in contextual use does not mean that Jesus preached the gospel. The word, without a modifier, simply means to declare something. The contextual use of the spirits refers to disembodied angelic spirits, not human ones. A further description of this visitation by Jesus is mentioned by the prophet Isaiah as declaring a further judgment on the angels that sinned, mentioned in Genesis 6 and Isaiah 26. In the next part of the series, we will discuss this in more detail. For our sake here, it is important to see that Jesus went to both chambers right after his death and before his ascension into heaven. Understanding this by the Bible's own statements draws some rather interesting conclusions to the two chambers that are mentioned. The lower chamber is the realm called hell, and commonly understood as a place for all things damned, angelic or human. What is not understood is the full understanding of just what this empty upper realm is. If Abraham's bosom, as defined by Jesus' own word, is the inner realm that he went to upon his death on the cross, as the Bible clearly indicates, we need to take notice of what else Jesus called this realm. Jesus told the thief next to him on the cross that today you shall be with me in paradise. Now keep in mind, after the cross, Jesus did not ascend into heaven first. He went down, then up. Jesus went into the bowels of the earth, to Abraham's bosom, where Lazarus went, which was paradise, along with the thief as promised. At this time all were released and ascended into the very presence of the Lord. The upper chamber is now empty of the faithful and sealed somehow from entrance. It is very important to understand this connection, because many further implications are made by this. The Bible will always define itself by itself. It is amazing, after these clear connections, that we have another verse that defines for us something more about paradise. Revelations 2:7 states, "To him that overcomes will I grant to eat of the tree of life, which is in the midst of the paradise of God." We know that the tree of life is in the Garden of Eden. There is only one tree of life. That would mean that Eden and paradise are one and the same, and so is Abraham's bosom. Where are they? Inside a hollow earth. It would also mean that H.M. Howell, over 100 years ago, had it biblically correct. The Garden of Eden, then, is not on the surface in some invisible never land or forgotten etherical place, but subterranean. Many cultural myths of man ascending from an inner earth are but a trace memory of what the Bible concurs, and it gets even stranger. What about openings to a hollow earth? Could some of the ideas of holes at the poles have any merit? Most all of the explorations by all nations searching for a hollow earth in the 19th and late 20th centuries We're directed to the Arctic and Antarctic poles by their knowledge about ancient myths, legends, possible history, and some even by the scriptures in the Bible. Recent satellite pictures over the North Pole have been revealing, to say the least. Why have we not heard of this controversy in the news? Almost all nations who can afford to have an outpost around the Arctic and Antarctic areas for scientific studies and research are present in both locations. Our own Air Force has Project HARP, High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program, is a huge antenna array directed toward the North Pole. HARP carries its own legendary mysteries like Area 51 in Roswell. Does the Bible shed any light on any of this? I think it does. Job 38:30. The waters are hid as with a stone, and the face of the deep is frozen. This is very interesting indeed. The waters hid are the internal waters of the deep or abyss, the subterranean waters. The excess flood waters, now frozen, covers the face or opening of the abyss like a stone on top of it. This covering of ice over the openings are what we call the Arctic and Antarctic circles. The actual process is described in the scriptures also. Psalms 33:7 says, He gathered the waters of the great sea together, and as a heap he layeth up the depth in storehouses. Also, Job 26:10, He hath compassed about the waters with bounds until the day and night come to an end. He hath compassed literally means he inscribed a circle to cover over the face of the subterranean waters. The words have an emphasis that this is a transfer resulting in hiding the subterranean storehouse like a treasure. The idea of a transfer suggests a change from a prior condition. This is described in 2 Peter 3:5-7. Before there was a flood, there was a complete easy access in and out of both realms. 2 Peter 3:5-7 says, For this is they are willingly ignorant of, that by the word of God the heavens were of old, and of the earth standing out of the water and in the water, whereby the world that was then, being overfilled with water, perished. But the heavens and the earth, which are now by the same word, are kept in store, reserved unto fire against the day of judgment and perdition of godly and ungodly men. The Greek word for earth means in its general term arable land. The Greek word synesteo for standing is better rendered as united together. In this sense, submerged land or flooded land is not what is mentioned here, but rather surface land out of the waters and surface land in the waters as subterranean. With this understanding, we can see that the arable land was united together out of the water and in the water, but the flood changed this. Verse 6 states that the world, as an ordered arrangement that existed before this, was destroyed or changed by Noah's flood. Now the face or openings at the poles are covered over by the frozen waters, and the inner and outer realms separated from each other. The upper chamber, the Arctic North Pole, according to Job 26:10, will be part frozen, exposed, and yet had some kind of boundary set before it, making it unapproachable until the end of time. The lower chamber, the Antarctic South Pole, is frozen over and sealed off, but it will be breached at some time in our history. The prophet Amos describes this in his book, which will be discussed in the next part. A possible rendering of Job 26:8 states this breaking in or breaching. He binds up the waters as a thicket, or like as a fortress, before broken into a hidden opening underneath. One chamber is empty of population, and its opening is sealed off by some kind of border until the end of time. The other chamber thrives with a rebel alliance population destined to make an alliance with surface dwellers and will invade it from below. Nothing down there is any good or has any redemptive value.
Understanding this reality, we are also told that there are humans living in this place as part of a judgment from God. Here is the evidence from the scriptures.
This story just keeps getting stranger as we go along, yet the scriptures confirm such strangeness. Now let's look at a commandment God told Israel to abide by. Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. Exodus 20:4. Also, woe unto the inhabitants of the earth and of the sea. Revelations 12:12. As we understand it, Eden is in an inner earth domain on a literal physical plane. There is a further implication of inhabitants that are actually existing down there. We need to re-examine another well-known text of Scripture to find out just where Cain was exiled to after he killed his brother Abel. Let's take a look at the dialogue between God and Cain right after he had killed Abel. And now thou art cursed from the earth, which hath opened up her mouth to receive thy brother's blood from thy hand. When thou tillest the ground, it shall not henceforth yield unto thee her strength.
A fugitive and a vagabond shall you be in the earth. And Cain said unto the Lord, My punishment is greater than I can bear. Behold, thou hast driven me this day from the face of the earth, the surface of the earth. And I shall be a fugitive and a vagabond in the earth, and it shall come to pass that every one that finds me shall slay me. And the Lord said unto him, Therefore whosoever slayeth Cain, vengeance shall be taken on him sevenfold. And the Lord set a mark upon Cain, lest any finding him should kill him. And Cain went out from the presence of the Lord, and dwelt in the land of Nod, east of Eden. Genesis 4:11 through 16. It is interesting to note that in the many translations of the Bible, only the older English versions, the King James and the American Standard, use the translation in the earth. All of the more recent translations simply say on the earth. Quite a big liberal speculation placed upon God's word because of the assumption that the earth is solid and therefore could not contain life inside. The only other translation I am aware of that agrees with the older versions is the Jerusalem Bible. This is the Old Testament translated into the English by the Hebrew scholars. Regardless of this compromise of interpretation from prior scriptures, the Bible clearly establishes that Abraham's bosom, Eden, or paradise, all the same, and hell are two separate chambers inside the earth. With that firmly established, the only word that could be used in this context is in, not on the earth. Cain was removed from the surface of the earth into a subterranean realm. He was given a mark that he would not be killed by others. This Hebrew word oath means an identifying mark in the sense of an agreement. When translated into the Greek, the word used is semeion, in the sense of a supernatural sign of some type. Is there any truth to the legends, myths, and possible historical records describing normal-sized to giant Caucasians dwelling underground, or occasionally appearing out of the caves to surface residents, and knowing that the Bible describes a group of people that were sentenced into the earth to live? Can one assume that the mark may be their large size and that the two groups are one and the same? I think this speculation is one that can hold merit. However, with the most critical thinking, I do not believe I can prove this as an absolute fact. However, I think there is sufficient evidence that can support this idea for serious consideration. First, there are several things going on from the text that we need to understand. As Cain was being sentenced for his crime, he was afraid of being captured or killed. God's response was that when he tilled the ground, it would not yield its strength for him. In context, I do not think God was referring to an agricultural problem, but one rather of a genetic defect that would perhaps keep he and his offspring in the subterranean environment. Consistent in the Bible is the use of growing and planting to describe genealogical progressions of life. In this context, it would make more logical sense and also backed by observable as evidence that a genetic defect is what the Lord was speaking of. God also states he had put a mark as an agreement and a supernatural sign or an act upon Cain. Something of a transformation to Cain is happening as he is sentenced to wander in the land of Nod. He is changed already in his soul by sin that has permeated him and his future offspring. In spite of this, he is given some kind of supernatural power to endure or protect himself. This is confirmed in the most unusual manner, but consistent in the Bible. Chuck Missler discovered a most interesting thing about lineages in the scriptures. I will let him tell you himself.
Another God appears to have laid out his plan in advance, and that's in some subtleties, and one of which I'd like to share with you in Genesis chapter 5. In Genesis chapter 5, we have a genealogy. The genealogy in Genesis chapter 5 goes from Adam, the first man, down through Noah. And in Genesis chapter 5, if you wade through that, I encourage you to make a list of the names. Adam gave birth to Seth. Seth, Enosh. Enosh, Kenan. Kenan, Mahalalel. Mahalalel, Jared. Jared, Enoch. Enoch, Methuselah. Methuselah, Lamech. And Lamech was the father of Noah. Let's take these names. 10 names. But see, the problem is we need to know what the names mean. And if you have a study Bible or a source, a lexicon, what have you, you know that the name Adam means man. As you go through your Bible, when these names are typically first introduced, most of your marginal footnotes will tell you what the name means. Adam means man. Seth means appointed. Enosh means mortal. Kenan means sorrow. Mahalalel means the blessed God. Jared means shall come down. Enoch means teaching. Methuselah means his death shall bring. Lamech means the despairing. And the word Noah means rest or comfort. Now, let's read that genealogy as a sentence. Man is appointed mortal sorrow. The blessed God shall come down, teaching that his death shall bring the despairing comfort. Isn't that wild?
This kind of biblical interpretation recognized in the Hebrew culture is called asad. Although seemingly mystical, it is perfectly acceptable as part of proper biblical interpretation. Establishing this discovery as a pattern, I have done the same thing to the 6 generations of Cain mentioned after the murder. Here is what the lineage using the same process tells us. Striked out to possess, disciplined fugitive, smitten of God, who is of God, powerful. What are the mathematical chances that this was coincidental? This was the description of Cain striking out his brother to take what he felt was his. Or it might have an even deeper meaning. Cain means spearhead, as in the process of striking out to make a claim or possession. Could this be describing a bigger picture here? Could this be an allusion of Satan's plan to establish his own firstborn seed to usurp God's creation? Jesus did mention in the parable of the wheat and tares that the enemy had sown his own seed among gods. Here is another way to look at this spear striking out to take a hold. It is interesting that the Wellesberg Castle, the center of all things occult as the Nazi think tank led by Himmler's SS, is shaped out in the form of a spear piercing a circle. In another part of this series, we will develop this connection further. As the encrypted message continues, Cain was disciplined by being sentenced to be a fugitive and a wanderer in the earth, and also smitten or stricken with a defect, but yet given a supernatural power. This power was ordained from God himself to fulfill his purposes. It is recorded that Cain's descendants were the first to raise animals for food, create the arts and music, first to build cities, and the first to work in metals, making implements of war. Could the mythical power of the virile Yah be a part of this power, or is it the stature and height, or perhaps both? Whatever their power is, it is supernatural and part of God's overall plan to fulfill his will. This interpretation is the only one that has logic and supported by observable evidence, even if the only surviving evidence is in myths and legends. The traits of Cain and his descendants also correspond to Noah's son Japheth. This connection is also important to understand another explanation in history, as we shall soon see. Genesis 9:27, God shall enlarge Japheth, and he shall dwell in the tents of Shem, and Canaan shall be his servant. 6601, Pathah, is the word in Hebrew used for enlarged. It means to broaden or open one's mind to increase, but this also has a dark side connotation to the word, as having a potential of vanity. The above text could be telling us details about the descendants of Japheth that are familiar to those of Cain's. This would literally mean that the descendants of Japheth would have a genetic inclination, but not exclusive, to build, explore, discover, create, and invent. But they would also think they were better because of and by their own accomplishments. They would also displace the brown race and have the black race for servants. To be honest, history would bear this out within the most recent observable evidence in the building of the American Empire. We know that Japheth was Caucasian and had the similarity to Cain. It is not a coincidence once you add up the evidence. This connection identifies and explains the legends of large white tribes from an inner earth. I have to make a disclaimer here that I am not bashing the white race, as I am a member of this group. I am also saved and secure as a child of God by his grace. I recognize God's grace and mercy and transforming power. All three races have specific positive attributes and a dark downside. All must also take responsibility for their own actions and accept God's forgiveness and transforming power likewise. If you will go to my website and look up the two seeds, you will find the rest of the story from the other races of mankind. All have sinned and none are without fault or accepting God's mercy.
You might ask why I am putting an emphasis on the giants with Caucasians. No, I am not a racist, but race does seem to have an important element in part of this mystery. From fossil records, we can see that all races existed before the flood. Noah did not suddenly have a rainbow family after the flood from some kind of adaptability of the human species, as some have theorized. The proof of this is in the fact that there are fossil remains of all three races of mankind before the flood. There is also fossil and mummified remains of all three races with a larger cranial capacity than that of modern man. These findings, although well documented and remains visible to the public in many museums across the globe, is always played down to total obscurity. The fossils are never mentioned for what they can be saying or what they mean, as it is in direct conflict with evolution and the idea of natural selection of species. The theory goes that the higher developed species will flourish as the lesser ones diminish to extinction. In this fossil case, we see a Cro-Magnon representing the European Caucasians. We find the Mulians representing the Semitic or brown races of man with a much larger cranial capacity than that of modern man. We also have the Boskop man with the largest cranial capacity representing a superior form of the black race of mankind. In these findings, we see the opposite from the theory of evolution happening. The superior intellect has died off to extinction and the lesser has survived as modern mankind, representing the three races of mankind as described in the Bible. This tells us of judgment from God, not natural selection. We have the actual fossil remains of the hybrid offspring of angelic human relations. We are told that they would return somehow after the flood mentioned in Genesis 6. We see this reoccurrence according in Numbers 13:3. There is a connection to the giants from Genesis 6 before the flood and the ones Joshua and Caleb confront after the flood. In the connection, there is also a difference between the two, and we are not told exactly what it is. They were huge in physical stature as before. This could not be the genetic defect known today as gigantism, as some have claimed, because it was rare, not even duplicated within the same families, let alone an entire culture or society. It was also a debilitating disease that resulted in diminished physical strength and eventual early death. Not exactly the witness example of entire cultures of giants thriving unchallenged and undefeated by anyone or anything. The tribes of giants mentioned in context to this story represent all three races of mankind as before the flood, but there is something significant that happens. Joshua and Caleb are told to wipe out every last breathing thing within these cultures that had this hybridization going on. They were successful in all except for one group. This group fled into the camp of the Philistines and found refuge, never to be removed, but integrated into the Philistine culture and society and flourished. This is where much later in history David contended with Goliath, and the king Og of Bashan is also mentioned as giants. These people were from the Philistine culture and race who were Caucasian. In the Bible, the original inhabitants called Philistines were of Hamitic descent, black, but they were displaced by a maritime sea people from the island of Crete called the Cathorum. They were tall, blonde-haired, blue-eyed people who acted just like the later Vikings. After displacing the original inhabitants from the Palestine area, they too were called the Philistines, depicted by wall reliefs in Egypt by Ramses II as tall, blonde, Hellenistic people. The Philistines, as mentioned in Part 2, are prophetically mentioned in the Bible in connection to the seed of the serpent and the hybridization program that would happen in the last days in Isaiah 14 and 29 and in Daniel 2:43.
I will now hope to show you how the actual archaeology and related myths and legends may confirm a possible relationship with Caucasian giants as being the descendants of Cain, the surface-dwelling remnant as a genetic mixing with the Philistines, and how they may be the same mentioned by Helena Blavatsky's Theosophy as also the surface-dwelling Aryan destined to meet and align themselves with the subterranean pureblood Aryan, bringing about a new age. This ideology became the Nazi agenda and a major prophetic fulfillment of bringing back the technology and the hybrid people that existed before the flood, as mentioned in Isaiah 14's relationship with the tribe of Dan and modern-day Philistines, the Nazis. Large burial mounds are found all throughout Central and Eastern America. They are said to be much older than the tribes existing in the area. Most tribes agree with this and from their own stories of the past. When some mounds have been excavated, giant human remains are discovered. Some anomalous artifacts are also revealed. There are claims today that the Smithsonian Institute, as well as others in the scientific communities, are involved in suppressing and covering up anything that would conflict with the belief in evolution. Here are only a few incidents that can indicate this. In April 5, 1909, edition of the Phoenix Gazette carried a story entitled, according to the article, a man named G.E. Kincaid made an astonishing discovery while on an expedition sponsored by the Smithsonian Institute in the Grand Canyon. Among his findings, a mammoth chamber about 1,400 feet underground from which radiates dozens of passageways like spokes of a wheel. Several hundred rooms, some of which contain artifacts such as weapons and copper instruments of a kind that have never been known to be native to the Americans. A crypt containing mummies, all adult males wrapped in bark fabric. A shrine containing a Buddha-like idol sitting cross-legged with a lotus flower in each hand. Stone tablets on which are carved mysterious Egyptian-like hieroglyphics. The article also mentions a legend of the Hopi Indians that say their ancestors once lived in an underground cavern world in the Grand Canyon. In 1892, Frank Burns of the U.S. Geological Survey reported that he had found strange coffins in the Knuth Cave along the southern branch of the Warrior River in Murphy's Valley, Alabama. The wooden coffins appeared to be hollowed out by fire, then chiseled with stone or copper tools. Each coffin was 7.5 feet long, 14 to 18 inches wide, and 6 to 7 inches deep. The lids were open on empty coffins. The specimens were sent to the Smithsonian Institute. However, museum officials suggested the coffins might actually be troughs. In any case, the museum lost the artifacts. While searching in a cave near the Grand Canyon at Barranca de Colbert in northern Mexico, in the early 1930s, explorer Paxton Hayes came across 34 mummified men and women. All had blonde hair, all rose to heights between 7 to 8 feet. In 1833, soldiers digging a pit at Lompoc Rancho, California, unearthed a 12-foot-tall giant with double rows of teeth, both on top and on the bottom. The Lompoc giant's teeth were unusual, but they were not unique. Another ancient skeleton found on Santa Rosa Island off the coast of California showed the same dental peculiarities. In 1879, some Indiana archaeologists dug into the ancient burial mound in Brewersville, Indiana, and unearthed a human skeleton that measured 9 foot 8 inches in length. The bones, which were stored in a grain mill, were swept away in a 1937 flood. In the 1880s, while digging in a mound at Sarie in Bradford County, Pennsylvania, a reputable group of antiquarians found skeletons of humans measuring not only above 7 foot tall, but having skulls with horns, located about 2 inches above the eyebrows. The diggers, including 2 professors and a Pennsylvania state historian, turned what they found over to the American Investigating Museum in Philadelphia, but the bones were afterwards either misplaced, stolen, or lost. In 1903, on an archaeological outing at Fish Creek, Montana, Professor S. Farr and his group of Princeton University students came across several burial mounds. Choosing one to dig into, they unearthed a skeleton of a man about 9 feet tall. Next to him were the bones of a woman who had been almost the same size. Nature magazine, in its December 7, 1891 issue, reported that at a depth of 14 feet into a large Ohio burial mound, excavators found a skeleton of a massive man in copper armor. He wore a copper cap while copper moldings encased his teeth. Copper armor also protected his arms, chest, and stomach. At his side by the skeleton lay a woman, probably his wife. In the 1860s, some excavators digging on a hill in Marion, Ohio, uncovered 30 skeletons who ranged in height from 7 to 8 feet. In the early years of the 20th century, a team clearing out bat guano from a cavern near Lovelock, Nevada, discovered several giant cadavers measuring well over 8 feet in height. Their hair, still intact, was said to have been long and reddish in color. Like many other things connected to Bible prophecy, there is a cover-up on a massive scale to the truth about our past, present, and future. The human agents may range from a wide variety of groups, all sharing in the common goal of a one world ruled by man apart from God. The particulars are debatable and very controversial, but the bottom line is that all elements are conspired to prevent God's creation, mankind, from understanding the truth. The ultimate leader behind this cover-up is Satan himself. The giants represent the idea of evolution and life apart from God. They represent one aspect of man's own vanity to be like God and self-sufficient apart from him. I believe we have established that giants are very real and a part of our past history. They are described as all tall or gigantic Caucasians with a strange appetite, a bad attitude, with a warlike nature. They bore children who were also tyrants and bullies and large in stature. The word descriptions of many of their names also suggest they have a shine or illumination to them, many times having 6-digit fingers and toes and a double row of teeth. The biblical descriptions are truly mirroring in all of these myths and legends and claimed history. The Bible holds the truth about the myths, legends, and claimed history as corrupted memories of the biblical account. In spite of a cover-up, there is hard evidence that has survived. As common as the flood account is throughout the whole world, so too is the account of giants. From childhood fairy tales of Jack the Beanstalk, Jack the Giant Killer, or the Jolly Green Giant of advertising vegetables, their creation stems from the ancient accounts of giants in all cultures from all ages and claimed history. I will briefly encapsulate a few examples from a vast amount of legends and myths from all over the world. Beginning in the east, we have the Dayatsas, which produce the Asuras as large shining ones. In Thailand, we have the Yak, where we find huge stone jars with lids strewn about in a path starting from northern India through Thailand down into Laos and Vietnam, suggesting a migratory pathway that belonged to some very large owners. In Sri Lanka, we have the legends of the Mahashina, depicted as white giants. We have the biblical Nephilim, mentioning tribes of giants from the Zamzamin, the Emites, the Rephaim, the Anakites, and individuals like Og of Bashan, being about 9 foot tall and having 6-digit fingers and toes with a double row of teeth, and of course the famous Goliath as a Philistine, a big white guy with a bad attitude. We have the Greek and Roman Parthenons, consisting of deities that were giant gods and their offspring, the Titans, Hercules being the most famous. We have the lion men of Moab. We have the Assyrian god Zoroaster, who was a large bearded white man that flew in a shiny disc and wore a pennant of a German knight's cross. We have the jinn of the Arabic world, with an Islamic folklore about 4 giants, 2 of them whom were named Gog and Magog. They were sent out to guard the 4 corners of the earth. Later, this myth may have been modified in Russia and described the 2 giants, Gog and Magog, who came out of the Euphrates River to guard the pillars and opening to the mythical gates of Alexandria. This account sounds similar to the prophetic account in Revelations, where the 4 spirits are loosed from the Euphrates and prepare the way of crossing for the kings of the east to invade Israel in the valley of British lore has 33 wives of a Roman emperor that were exiled from Rome and washed ashore in England, who then married with demons and produced the giants Gog and Magog. Irish lore claims that they are descendants of Gog. In Europe, we have ogres, trolls, and other giants in myths and legends. Thor, Grendel, and Freya of Nordic myths as part of Wagner's operas are the most familiar of the Norse gods. In Greenland, the Inuit have a legend of an Inuit hunter who faces Sakil Yuusi of the Tarnuk, or long ago people, who in past times made the Inuit disappear. In Northern America, most American Indian tribes and locations over the entire continent can recount legends about encounters with giants. The Shawnees claim a civilization of large whites lived in Florida before they arrived and left their buildings going back into the caves of the earth. Incas have a similar folklore of a subterranean white race that travels via caves. Legends of the Oglala Sioux claim that the giant white men lived in the northern areas. Archaeological evidence seems to confirm this. The Hopi tales have encounters of large white giants that came out of the nearby caves. They also claim and found the founding of their religious beliefs came to them by encounters of the Pahana, large white brothers that came from the heavens. Above every teepee was placed their main icon, a sign of good luck, the swastika. In South America, we have the Viracocha of the Incas, Kukulkan of the Mayans, and Quetzalcoatl of the Aztecs. And in the central area is Gucamas. They are all described as gigantic or tall white bearded gods that came from the skies. Viracocha was said to have made giants and then humans. The giants were named after him and were tall bearded white humanoids and are said to have built the cities in the area. It was said that the giants soon ate all the game and then began to eat humans. They all became corrupt and Viracocha destroyed them in a flood. Spanish explorers found large human bones and skeletons, and the natives told them of the Viracocha. When they came upon the ruins at Tiwanaku, Bolivia, the explorers were told that the Viracocha built the city in one night by floating 2 to 5 ton blocks in place by a magic trumpet. We are only beginning to understand light and sound as power sources, and it may be this was an actual application of an unknown physics of harmonics applied to some kind of electromagnetic anti-gravity applications as revealed by Nikola Tesla. The fierceness of these deities reflect upon the cultures of the Incas, Mayas, and Aztecs as they practiced cannibalism and rituals of sacrifice ripped out a person's heart while they were still conscious. In spite of such depravity, the giants also bestowed upon their human worshippers technology beyond their proper time frame. Many of the tribes performed trepanning, a form of brain surgery, and Mayans had a calendar as accurate as our modern-day atomic clock. In all of the myths and legends of giants, there is one that is always left out, and yet is pivotal to understanding how these ancient mysteries have already affected our own modern history today. Helena Blavatsky was born of Russian nobility and later moved to New York in the late 1800s. She has been credited as being the godmother of the New Age movement. She traveled extensively and combined myths, legends, religions, and pseudoscience to a philosophy religion called Theosophy, melding Hinduism, Buddhism, and Taoism and the mystery ancient schools of Egypt, the Mithraism of the Grecian and Roman empires, and Babylon. She brought back the serious worship of these ancients as an updated intellectual form of Gnostic philosophy. Her 2-volume text, called The Secret Doctrine, has impacted the world almost as much as the Bible, only in the opposite matter. I personally call her the anti-Moses. She defined a time when the golden age of the gods dominated the earth. It was said that there were 7 different races that had superhuman power, created from dirt and primates. They soon misused their powers and became violent and tried to dominate each other. Some were giants, others were grotesque like monsters. The gods realized that they had to find a solution to this problem. They created a new Superman to dominate and eventually lead the others back on the right path. This new stock came genetically from the gods themselves and were supposed to be superior in strength. Trained by the Manu, gods from the heavens, they were isolated into the high mountainous regions to prepare for their future roles as leaders. The other races discovered the plan, and war against the new master race began. The master race wins the war, but in the process loses their spirituality and their powers. A religion was given to them by the Manu, and a special sign showing their uniqueness apart from the other races. It was the sign of the sun wheel. This symbol, as described by Blavatsky, revealed the flow of the electromagnetic creative flow, Vohat, as a pure energy consciousness called Atma, which came from a hollow earth from the north and flowing back into the pole in the south called the pit. This was also prophetic of the race's origin as coming first out of the earth in the North Pole, and then their prophetic eventual return to the underworld place or origin near the end of their Dharma cycle, which is going back into the opening at the South Pole, or the pit. The arm of this sun wheel depicted centripetal or centrifugal flows and indicated the past or future of the race. In Atlantis, the master race thrived, until another war broke out between other races, and the Manu destroyed Atlantis with a flood. The surviving master race was taken safely to the mountaintops of the Himalayan mountains, and there in Shambhala they would await for their destined role to rule the new world. If you haven't guessed it so far, the master race was called the Aryan, and the sunwheel sign was called the swastika. This was the religion and driving force which brought the Nazis to do everything they did in their 12 years of global terror. We are still under the philosophy. It is now being repackaged as a warm and friendly New Age movement, but that will be for another time. The Nazis were in pursuit of large white giants they believed to be their pure-strained blood brothers. Prophetically, they believed they were destined to make an alliance with them, using their supernatural power to rule the world. This then was the occult beliefs and driving force which they acted upon. Without realizing it, they were trying to bring back the world before the flood, the people, and the technology.
So who were the giants? Are they the Nephilim? I believe this connection is doctrine and provable based on the Hebrew. Secular self-proclaiming gurus from the UFO and conspiracy communities will falsely claim that it means from heaven to earth they came down. They are not Bible scholars, and it does not say that in any true scholarly sense. The root of Nephilim, Nephal, does mean to fall, however. In the contextual use in Genesis 6, it literally means giants, period. So the Nephilim are giants with a connotation that they are fallen ones, but again, in context, only giants. They are rebels and they are evil. But is the Nephilim the same enemy group as the Gabor, as described as? I hope I have presented here the possibility that they may not be the same entity group as commonly thought. History, myths, and archaeology may point to a conclusion that the groups are different. Either way, they are part of the rebellion to God and on the same side of the war as enemy combatants. If the Nephilim are a different group as the inner earth offspring of Cain after he killed Abel, it certainly can explain their appearance and reappearance before and after the flood. They simply went back to what was appointed to them by God himself as part of their judgment. only to reappear from caves and tunnels to mingle with the surface humans, and a continuation of a form of hybridization or mixture of Cain's seed of the serpent with the seed of the woman, contaminating God's intended lineage, just as the mixture of the fallen angelic host did with humans before the flood. This would not require a second incursion, as it would be only a continuation in a similar but different fashion, like proclaimed by Numbers 33:3. It also fits perfectly with the Aryan Nazi myths of an inner earth pure strain of so-called supermen who would make a human surface-dwelling alliance to bring about a new world order. It can also explain the prophetic involvement of the Philistines and the tribe of Dan as the ones to be mingled in a two-part last empire that would be part scattered and part united. The only other option to this possibility is that a second incursion had to have happened by the same sons of God after the flood. The option of a tainted bloodline surviving the flood from Noah's family has far too many conflicts with known scripture to even be considered as another viable option. As we shall see in Part 4, there is a continuity with end-time prophetic warnings if we understand the giants as Cain's descendants are similar but separate with the Gibor. I want to end this section with the actual beginning history of this unholy alliance of humans and possibly Cain's descendants. Then in Part 4, we will see how history has already revealed much of the UFO alien deception and the Nazi agenda and the New Age New World Order are all one and the same, concluding in the Valley of Megiddo.
The Icelandic expedition was motivated by the belief that the local ancient text called the Edda may hold the key to finding the location of the survivors of Atlantis, their blood relatives and hopeful allies. Some thought they may be the descendants of the people living in Iceland and Greenland. Others thought they became the mythical Hyperboreans who now live in a hollow earth. Whatever their conclusions they left off next to Tibet. In several expeditions to Tibet, the last at the request of Buddhist monks, yielding many relics and ancient texts as desired evidence which the Nazis brought back to Germany. The Tibetan monks saw the Nazis as a fulfillment of their own prophecies, as the ones with the Shambhala power that would complete the final Dharma cycle of the Aryan and usher in a new age of enlightenment. With open arms, the Nazis conducted ethnic studies, earth magnetism tests, and were given access to the cave systems within the Himalayas, forbidden to others for centuries. A sacred volume of ancient texts said to be from the time of Atlantis, or from a biblical point of view, pre-flood texts, were brought back to Germany. They even enlisted over 200 monks as technical experts and SS officers who were taken to Wellsberg Castle, which was Himmler's SS Anunnaki Nazi esoteric think tank. Soon afterwards, there was an announcement in the German papers that with the help of the Tibetan monks, the opening to the hollow earth had been discovered. This is when the 1938 expedition to the Antarctic began. The Nazis cordoned off an area of Queen Maud Land and renamed it New Schwabenland. Since that time, submarines from Germany established a regular route there. During the war, German submarines caught or captured in the areas discovered an overload of people. What should have been a normal crew of 8 to 12 men had as many as 50 people in them. It has been speculated that a colonization was taking place. A statement from Admiral Donitz may have confirmed this. As the head of the German Navy, Donitz told young submariners in school that if the war took a turn for the worse, they had already established a safe harbor to relocate to. At the same time activity increased in the Antarctic, German nationals began buying properties all along mountain ranges all throughout the world, but concentrating in the West, in South America, and even New Mexico, Arizona, and California. The American OSS was following this occult trail and was well aware of the suspicious activity. At the war's end, the American OSS was confronted by many surprises and a great mystery, which were all connected to the Antarctic and a hollow earth. These mysteries, when added up and using little imagination, tells us a very remarkable story. At the end of World War II, we found many of the largest modern German submarines missing from their pens, never to be found or seen again. As the Allies rushed toward Germany, the U.S. allowed Russia to take Berlin without dispute. We sent General Patton's group to Prague instead. As author Joseph Farrell points out in his book, Reich of the Black Sun, we were more interested in the Nazis' own nuclear bomb program and other developing technologies than we were an outward show of victory. We let Russia enjoy that part while we had bigger goals to complete. Prague was one place we knew was a key location for real war booty. This led the Allies to Nordhausen, where we found amazing discoveries. Nordhausen was a huge underground complex built into the mountains where the Nazis continued to manufacture and develop the new superweapons Hitler spoke of. Traditional history tells of captured rockets and jet aircraft, but until recently has always conveniently left out the other discoveries. Circular and triangular aircraft in various stages of development were also discovered. I have seen these for myself on U.S. archived microfilm. They are real. Although anything captured was conventionally propelled, they were still like nothing anyone had seen before. What also had been alleged to have been discovered were blueprints and plans of alternate energy sources and methods of propulsion, such as vortex implosion engines, electromagnetic gyros, and other advanced forms of technology. In other locations, experiments in high altitude and low temperature effects on the human body were also discovered, suggesting the preparation for a space program. I have seen these microfilm documents and have them in my own collection. Cloning technology was also discovered from Joseph Mengele and other experiments in the death camps, as well as mind control. This caused a near panic to retrieve these important informations and discoveries and its creators and keepers of these secrets before anyone else. Operation Paperclip, Lusty, and Sunrise went into action to obtain these objects, people, and documentation. These programs ultimately became America's undoing, and I believe is even prophetically mentioned in Daniel 11:43 through 45. To get the details, I describe them in my book. This search made the OSS aware of other mysteries. As recorded in Guinness Book of World Records, the largest unsolved bank heist ever was the entire German Reichstag Bank. This is not including the many caches of looted gold recovered by the Allies after the war. This would be like someone conquering the U.S. and upon entering Fort Knox they find it empty, with everyone saying they knew nothing about it. The mysterious fact is that the entire tangible national economy disappeared. That does not happen by accident. While looking for the scientists and engineers working on Nazi Black Ops type programs, some were found, but most seemed to disappear, just as the highest man in charge, Hans Kammler. They, like the money and submarines, disappeared never to be seen again. As part of
Lebensborn.
a eugenics program, many Aryan women and selected SS men were used as baby breeders to recreate the pure Aryan. With the largest disappearance in the Ukraine and other amounts from all other occupied territories, and I know this sounds incredible, but almost 200,000 people are unaccounted for. This does not include MIAs, PAOWs, and those executed in death camps. The Nazis were articulate in records keeping, and this is a fair estimation that seems to have disappeared off the face of the earth. 2 months after the war, 2 Nazi submarines surrendered to Argentine authorities, who then hand over the crews to the American OSS. The crews said that they had just left the Antarctic, where they left supplies near a cave in the German area of New Schwabenland. The OSS kept the officers for the next 2 years for questioning. All this evidence just cries out, as incredible as it might sound, that an entire government and key individuals with a significant population relocated to somewhere else. The U.S. did not take this evidence lightly. We knew of the Nazi occult trail of exploration and backtracked their steps. This led us to dispatch our only expert on the Antarctic, Admiral Byrd, to the Antarctic. The public was told that this was a scientific venture to test military equipment in severe cold climates and to do further mapping and geological studies. The contingency to Operation High Jump consisted of 13 military ships, including an aircraft carrier, battleships, and a typical military operation. It also included 4,000 ground troops, a couple of PBY reconnaissance planes, and heavy military equipment. There was not one special-built research ship included. The group broke off into 2 groups and made a 3-pronged military entrance onto the Antarctic continent, headed toward the German base 211 in the area they called New Schwabenland. They were outfitted for an 8-month stay. However, after only 2 weeks, they returned with the loss of many heavy equipment and planes. En route back, a ship-to-shore communication with a Chilean newspaper stated that Admiral Byrd told them that in the future we would have to contend with aircraft that could fly from pole to pole in a matter of minutes. There is no proof of this conversation, and it appears that a cover-up is in the process. Once back home, Admiral Byrd was taken to Washington, where he was sworn to silence and the whole matter kept hushed. Nothing else was ever mentioned in the press, and it became a non-event. Years later, Admiral Byrd tried to push Congress to use the Antarctic to test as a test site for our nuclear bombs. When in 1952, a month before the bill was to be presented to the floor for discussion, Washington is suddenly buzzed by groups of UFOs flying in a typical German formation. The bill was dropped, and soon afterward, the international policy on both Arctic and Antarctic circles was developed. 5 months after High Jump, our government officials were nervously searching for a last bastion of Nazis who may have fled with a technology that challenged their position as victors of World War II. Many sightings, including the Kenneth Arnold sighting, depicted UFOs that were identical to the captured Nazi documents.
What appeared to be a victory by the Allies in World War II was nothing more than a replay to the eventual fall of the Roman Empire. Rome had thought they had put a final stop to an archenemy Israel when in 70 AD Titus came into Jerusalem, killed the last group of rebellious Jews, the Zealots, sacked and desecrated the temple, killing all of the leaders, and putting to flight the rest of those who rebelled to Roman authority. Unfortunately for Rome, the very essence of Judaism, in the form of the followers of Jesus, remembered his warnings and fled into the mountains before the wrath to come. The believers of Jesus fled right into the eastern provinces of the Roman Empire to escape, and eventually into Rome itself. This was to the Rome's undoing, because from within a strange mixture of pagan and Christian beliefs transformed Rome into a Holy Roman Empire, with the old pagan republic forever destroyed, all from within. At the end of World War II, the United States came under the same replay. As we smashed Nazi Germany and killed its leader, put the rest of the captured leaders on trial, we thought we had won. The rest of the leadership fled to a safe haven to start a second stage attack from the Antarctic. Another group, the Nazi scientists, who were the makers of secret technology, and the security forces, who were the secret keepers of this technology, were taken to America as war booty. The same internal transformation began in America, changing the old republic into a strange mixture of true Christianity and the theosophical beliefs into a system called the New Age. From within, our worldview changed and was supported and confirmed from outside by the last bastion of escaped Nazi population, along with the leaders allied with fallen angels, Cain's descendants, and a demonic horde, all pretending to be aliens from outer space. Joshua and Caleb was warned not to take the spoils of war into themselves, as it would change them from within. We should have taken heed to the same warning. Next, we will see this alliance from hell in history covered up, and the real prophetic scriptures to see what has happened and what will continue on as the plan from hell, known as the mystery of iniquity.